Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a massive stack of source material articles, biographies, deep research, and we distill it all down into the crucial insights you need to be truly informed.
And today, we are undertaking a real expedition.
We really are. We're going into the life and, the monumental legacy of the figure who, more than anyone else, really pioneered and popularized the exploration of 3/4 of our planet.
We are plunging into the world of Jacques-Yves Cousteau.
Absolutely. And it's funny, Cousteau wasn't just a man who looked beneath the waves. He did so much more.
He fundamentally changed how humanity sees itself in relation to the entire global ecosystem. He became the ocean's first truly global ambassador.
Yeah.
And this whole deep dive, our mission today, it's really set against his own vision. He famously said something that just underscores the urgency of his entire life's work.
What was that?
He said, "The sea, the great unifier, is man's only hope." Now, as never before, the old phrase has a literal meaning. We are all in the same boat.
Wow. That quote it perfectly encapsulates the sheer scope of what we're doing here today. We're covering everything. His technological innovations, which are just incredible.
Absolutely.
Completely. And then his career as a naval officer, his huge body of film work, and then later on, his more controversial environmental advocacy.
Right.
Our mission here is to work past that iconic red bonnet and really uncover the essential details, from the engineering that made underwater life possible to the profound paradoxes of his legacy, and really understand how he created a global movement.
We really have to look at the whole trajectory of the man. You see him move from being this, military engineer focused on technical problems and solutions to becoming a kind of global conscience.
Yeah, grappling with the big picture.
Grappling with the ethical and environmental costs of those very solutions he helped create. It's a fascinating arc.
Okay, let's unpack this. And we're going to start, funnily enough, not with the ocean, but with an accident on land. We begin with Section 1, the accidental oceanographer and the birth of Suitubos.
The irony there is just so rich, because Jacques-Yves Cousteau was absolutely not destined for the deep ocean, not at first. He was born in Saint-André-de-Cubzac in 1910, and after graduating from the very prestigious École Navale in 1930, he trained as a gunnery officer.
A gunnery officer?
Yes. And his big career goal, his passion, was naval aviation. He was literally aiming for the sky.
He had his flight wings in sight, ready to launch this high-flying military career. And then, as you said, fate just intervenes with this terrible twist.
It's the absolute defining inflection point of his life. In 1933, he gets into a severe automobile accident. And the sources are all very clear on this. It was bad. The accident broke both of his arms so severely that it completely and permanently derailed his career as a pilot.
Just like that.
Just like that. The rigorous physical requirements for aviation were just. They were no longer attainable for him. But instead of being grounded professionally, he took that long recovery period as this opportunity to pivot. He pivoted toward what he called his latent passion for the ocean.
It's just a remarkable example of how a devastating physical setback can channel ambition into a path that literally changes the world. Think about it. If he'd become a naval aviator, modern diving might have been delayed by decades.
Oh, absolutely. And once his focus shifted, the experimentation began almost immediately. His early underwater work started in Toulon around 1936. At this point, it was purely, exploratory.
What kind of gear was he even using back then?
Very simple stuff. Notably, these Fresnel underwater goggles, which were lent to him by his friend, Philippe. They were a core part of that early group.
So he's just kind of peeking beneath the surface, adapting whatever recreational gear he can get his hands on. How does he get from that limited view to, actual exploration?
Well, the first big step toward autonomy came in 1939. He started using a self-contained breathing apparatus that had been invented a bit earlier, back in 1926, by Commander Yves Le Prieur.
Okay, so a breathing apparatus already existed. What was the problem with it?
The problem was significant. It was a constant flow system. So air just flowed continuously out of the tank, whether the diver was inhaling or not. And this led to an incredibly rapid depletion of your air supply.
That sounds just incredibly wasteful. It would limit your time underwater to, just a few minutes? That's not a foundation for any kind of real exploration.
Exactly. And Cousteau was, at his core, an engineer. He was immediately dissatisfied with that limited duration.
Yeah.
Plus, there was another problem. The constant flow meant you were super buoyant when the tank was full, and then as it emptied, you'd suddenly start to sink. It was unmanageable.
So he realized the missing piece wasn't just carrying air with you.
It was about regulating the air intelligently.
And this realization, This is what leads to the true breakthrough. The one that, I mean, it still sits on the back of every self-contained underwater breathing apparatus used today. Let's make sure we define that clearly for our learner. SCUBA.
Chesky-EP, yes. Self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. The big breakthrough happens between 1942 and 1943, right in the middle of occupied France during World War II.
A tough time to be innovating.
Incredibly. He teams up with Émile Gagnan, who was a mechanical engineer working at the company Air Liquide. And here's the genius part. Gagnan had developed a demand regulator for a completely different purpose. He was using it to conserve cooking gas for cars in France because of the petrol shortage.
Wait. A demand regulator for gas rationing in cars gets adapted for underwater breathing. That is a beautiful, beautiful synergy of necessity and invention.
It was pure ingenuity. Their innovation was, on the surface, simple, but it was profound. The regulator would only supply air when the diver created a slight negative pressure by inhaling. It only gave air on demand.
So no more wasted air.
No more wasted air. And this conservation extended underwater time from minutes to potentially hours. It transformed a brief, dangerous dip into a sustained, manageable exploration.
And this meant the diver could finally move freely, horizontally, at different depths, without constantly fiddling with valves or being tethered to the surface. It basically democratized the underwater world almost overnight.
And this improved design, which was manufactured by Air Liquide, became the first prototype Aqua-Lung.
So this open-circuit SCUBA technology, that's the bedrock of everything we have today.
It is. And it's important to remember, the early tests, including them filming épaules, which means shipwrecks, in 1943, all this happened while France was occupied during the war. Cousteau's life during this period was just incredibly complex and intense.
Right. You mentioned he was still involved with the military even while he was doing all this innovation. How did he balance the occupation, his scientific work, and his loyalty to France?
He was a very committed officer. Our sources confirm he was actively helping the French Navy rejoin the Allies after the surrender. He even carried out commando operations against Italian espionage services operating in France.
So he was a war hero.
He was, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He earned several military decorations for it. He was a wartime hero working secretly in the service of the resistance.
But this period also holds a really devastating, complicated layer of his personal biography. It involves his own family.
It's a profound contrast, and it's one that really demands reflection. While Jacques was this decorated naval officer fighting for the Allies and at the same time revolutionizing underwater tech, his older brother, Pierre-Antoine Cousteau, was on the completely opposite side.
What was he doing?
Pierre-Antoine was a journalist, and he was the editor for the collaborationist and overtly anti-Semitic newspaper, Juifs Partout.
Wow. That kind of profound political and moral divergence within a single family, especially during a time of such existential conflict, it must have been just crippling.
It was a moral chasm. And after the liberation of France, the consequences for Pierre-Antoine were swift and they were severe. He was convicted and sentenced to death in 1946.
A death sentence.
Yes. Though that sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment, and he was eventually released in 1954. But Jacques-Yves Cousteau, the global icon, reportedly kept his distance from his brother during that terrible period.
That detail, it really forces us to see Cousteau not just as this fearless adventurer, but as a man navigating this profound personal moral complexity during the most testing time in French history.
It does.
Do our sources indicate if this family division, if it informed or maybe even accelerated his desire to just focus entirely on the neutral, apolitical world of the ocean?
Well, Cousteau himself rarely commented directly on his brother's politics. But the deep dive certainly suggests a professional acceleration. The ocean, unlike the conflicted world of human politics, it offered this pure, challenging, unbounded frontier.
A kind of escape.
Perhaps a necessary escape, yes.
Yeah.
The success of the Aqua-Lung allowed him to shift his focus immediately after the war, moving from combat to really institutionalizing exploration. It might have been his way of dealing with the moral and political wreckage left behind on land.
That level of technical and professional genius, coupled with a deep sense of national duty, it just perfectly set the stage for his next phase. Mastering the personal breathing apparatus wasn't enough. He needed a global platform.
He did.
Moving forward then, Cousteau transitioned from these personal dives to institutional leadership and large-scale oceanic research. And that brings us to Section 2, the explorer's platform, Calypso and submersible development.
Right. The French Navy immediately grasped the strategic potential of the Aqua-Lung. It wasn't just for looking at fish. So in 1946, Cousteau and Philippe co-founded the GRS, the French Navy's underwater research group.
GRS, okay.
It later became GERS, and this was the first official institutional effort to leverage autonomous diving for military, salvage, and hydrographic purposes.
This was a completely new frontier, though, and whenever you're pioneering anything, the risks are just immense, especially with the physiological unknowns of deep diving.
Oh, the danger was immediate, and often it was fatal. In 1947, just a year after the GRS was founded, they suffered a really tragic loss. Chief Petty Officer Maurice Farg died while using the Aqua-Lung near Toulon. He was attempting to set a new depth record of 120 meters. This incident just painfully highlighted the immense, and at the time poorly understood, risks of things like nitrogen narcosis and oxygen toxicity at depth.
Even with their new improved technology.
Even with the Aqua-Lung. Every single gain in depth was a direct confrontation with the absolute limits of human physiology.
But those risks didn't halt progress, did they? They just sort of redirected the focus toward gathering scientific data and mapping the underwater world.
Precisely. Post-war, the French Navy, with Cousteau's team leading the way, rapidly moved into scientific application. The 1948 campaign on the sloop Elie Monnier was a total game-changer.
The Elie Monnier, okay.
On that expedition, they successfully explored the ancient Roman wreck of Mahdia off the coast of Tunisia. And this is so historically important because it's recorded as the very first underwater archaeology operation ever conducted using autonomous SCUA.
Wow, so it showed that complex, detailed, multi-day work, which was previously impossible, was now actually feasible.
You can do real science down there now.
Yeah.
And the Elie Monnier was a really crucial early vessel for Cousteau. It also put him in direct contact with other deep-sea pioneers of the time.
Right, because in 1949, he and the Elie Monnier team, they assisted in the recovery and rescue of Professor Jacques Piccard's groundbreaking deep-sea submersible, the FNRS-2 bathyscaphe.
They did, yeah, during an expedition near Dakar.
Okay, let's pause here quickly for our listener. We're using the term bathyscaphe. What exactly is that? How does it differ from a regular submarine or the later submersibles that Cousteau himself developed?
Good question. A bathyscaphe is, it's essentially a small, very strong spherical pressure hull that's suspended beneath a large float. And that float is filled with a highly buoyant liquid, usually gasoline, which is lighter than water and crucially incompressible.
Okay.
Unlike a submarine, it can't really move horizontally on its own very far. It's designed to dive vertically. It uses heavy ballast weights to descend and then releases them to ascend. It's more like a deep-sea elevator than a submarine.
So the rescue of the FNRS-2 was significant.
Very significant, because the French Navy later used the actual sphere from that rescued vessel to construct their own bathyscaphe, the FNRS-3. This whole episode positioned Cousteau squarely in the world of extreme depth exploration, even before he had his own iconic vessel.
And that iconic vessel arrived in 1950. And this really signaled Cousteau's shift from being a naval officer to becoming an independent oceanographic commander.
This is when he secured his legend. Cousteau officially leaves the French Navy and founds the French Oceanographic Campaigns, or FOC. And then, in a moment of incredible fortune and backing, he leases a former Royal Navy minesweeper. Her name was Calypso.
And he leased it from the Irish millionaire and former politician Thomas Lowell Guinness.
He did. And the lease price was the truly symbolic sum of 1 franc per year.
1 franc, that's less than $1. That kind of arrangement, it just suggests that Guinness saw the immense potential in Cousteau's vision and was willing to back it financially, knowing it would be a platform for global discovery.
Oh, absolutely. The Calypso was immediately refitted. She became his principal vessel, a mobile laboratory, a floating base for diving, and maybe most importantly, the stage for all of his filming work.
The vessel itself became a character.
It was instantly recognizable with that distinctive silhouette, the helicopter pad on the stern. It was through the Calypso that he organized extensive deep-sea archaeological excavations, like the important finds at Grand Congolet in 1952.
But Cousteau was always pushing the boundaries. So once he maximized what divers in SCUBA gear could do, he started looking beyond human limits to reach those truly abyssal depths.
The physical limits of saturation diving, they meant that deep-sea observation required advanced machinery. And his time as the director of the Oceanographic Museum of Monaco, which started in 1957, was critical for developing these new tools.
Right, that's where he co-invented the diving saucer, the SP350, with Sean Mollard.
Exactly.
The diving saucer, we need a little more detail on this because this represents a massive leap in capability from the bathyscaphe, right?
a huge leap in agility. The SB-350 was a small, two-person submersible designed for visual observation and sampling. It was distinct from those heavy, purely vertical bathyscaphes. It was agile. It had a maximum depth capability of 350 meters.
So it could move around.
It could move around. Yeah. Its success was due to its maneuverability and the fact that it could be launched and recovered relatively easily from the deck of the Calypso. This success led to the rapid development of two further vehicles, the SP-500s, which could reach 500 meters by 1965. And this gave Cousteau's team physical access to the entire continental shelf.
So he could now observe the deep, but he famously wanted to go beyond just visiting. He wanted to create a permanent human presence beneath the surface. And this leads us to the iconic, incredibly ambitious Conshelf projects.
The Conshelf projects, the continental shelf stations, were perhaps the most spectacular non-filmic achievement of his entire career. These were experiments in saturation diving, and they were aimed at creating environments where men could live and work continuously on the seafloor.
Okay, let's break down what saturation diving is for the listener and how that made these underwater villages even possible.
Sure. Saturation diving is a physiological adaptation. When a diver breathes compressed gas, and at great depth, it's usually a helium-oxygen mixture called heliox to avoid nitrogen narcosis. The inert gas, in this case helium, gets absorbed into the body's tissues.
Okay.
Once the body's tissues are fully saturated, a process that takes about 24 hours, the decompression time required to safely return to the surface is the same. It doesn't matter if the diver stays down for 2 days or for 2 weeks.
So the whole goal was to eliminate the need for that daily, risky, and very time-consuming decompression. You just decompress once at the very end of the mission.
Exactly. And the Conshelf projects proved this concept in 3 groundbreaking iterations. Conshelf I, or Precontinent I, in 1962 was the initial proof of concept.
The test run.
The test run. 2 oceanauts, as he called them, lived for 7 days at a pretty shallow depth of 10 meters off the coast of Marseille. The habitat was a modest, pressurized cylinder. Its primary purpose was just to demonstrate that a human could psychologically and physiologically withstand continuous underwater living for a week.
And then came the dramatic scale-up with Conshelf II.
Conshelf II, or Precontinent II, in 1963 was massive by comparison. It took place in the Red Sea, near Sudan. This operation involved the main habitat, which they dubbed the Starfish House, where 5 oceanauts lived for a whole month at 10 meters.
A month?
A month. And they had ancillary facilities, including a smaller, deeper structure called a deep cabin at 25 meters, where 2 oceanauts lived for a week breathing a special helium mixture.
What were the practical challenges of living in the Starfish House? Were they in like a shirt sleeve environment or constantly in pressurized diving suits?
It was a pressurized environment, so they could remain in the habitat in normal clothes without specialized suits. They could exit the habitat directly into the water for work and then just re-enter. The real challenges were logistical. Managing air purification, handling the intense humidity, and maybe most critically, the psychological strain of confined living.
I can imagine.
They had basic comforts, a small kitchen and living quarters, but their entire world was highly regulated by pressure and precise gas mixtures.
And the culmination, the deepest experiment, was Conshelf III.
Conshelf III, Precontinent III, in 1965, was the most ambitious of all. It saw 6 men live and work at a depth of 100 meters off the French Riviera for 3 weeks. This was a critical depth because it mirrored the average depth of the continental shelf, where future commercial oil and gas operations would likely take place.
100 meters is a staggering depth for a continuous manned habitat. What specific work were they actually performing down there?
The oceanauts performed realistic industrial and geological tasks. They simulated things like operating oil wellheads, conducting underwater welding. They were proving the viability of using saturation divers for deep-sea engineering.
And the habitat itself?
The habitat was a massive steel sphere designed to withstand that immense external pressure while being pressurized internally to the equivalent of 100 meters of water pressure. This experiment proved, without a doubt, that long-term human habitation and complex heavy work were possible at those extreme depths.
So Cousteau gives us the technology for individual freedom underwater with the Aqua-Lung, and then using the Calypso as the command center, he engineers the institutional platform for a sustained deep-sea presence with these Conshelf habitats.
His work simultaneously pushed the limits of personal physical endurance and large-scale engineering. But as we noted, none of this would have cemented his legacy without the third and perhaps most crucial piece: his ability to communicate the wonder of what he discovered.
Which flows perfectly into Section 3. The communicator bringing the ocean to the world. Cousteau was, I mean, he was a genius at translating technical achievement into a compelling story.
He had such a keen sense of visual media right from the very beginning. His early work included the first French underwater film, Par 18 mètres de fond, or 18 meters deep, way back in 1942. He followed that up a year later with Épave, or Shipwrecks.
So these were early experiments, basically.
Yeah, early experiments with pressure-proof camera cases. But they already demonstrated his unique cinematic eye. He knew how to frame a shot, how to build a narrative, even then.
But the moment he truly connected with the public, when he captured the global imagination, that started with the written word, didn't it?
It did. It was the 1953 book, The Silent World, a story of undersea discovery and adventure, which he co-wrote with Frédéric Dumas. This book established the tone, personal, adventurous, and scientifically curious, that would define his entire brand.
And it contains one specific scientific prediction that I think is often overlooked in favor of his later fame.
Indeed. It's a fascinating little nugget that shows his observational genius. In the book, Cousteau correctly surmised the existence of porpoise echolocation, an animal form of sonar, purely by observing their behavior near the Straits of Gibraltar.
How on earth did he reach that conclusion without any sophisticated acoustic measuring equipment?
Well, he recounted how his research vessel, the Elie Monnier, was heading toward the Straits. A group of porpoises started following them, riding the bow wave as they do. So Cousteau, as an experiment, deliberately altered the ship's course by just a few degrees, moving away from the optimal straight route to the center of the strait.
And the porpoises.
They followed the ship for a few minutes, but then they unilaterally diverged toward mid-channel again, ignoring the ship and just resuming the most efficient course.
So they knew the best path better than the ship did.
It's exactly. Cousteau reasoned that they must have had some kind of internal navigational system, similar to the relatively new sonar technology that submarines were starting to use to determine the most direct route through the current and the underwater topography. He was predicting a biological capability based purely on observational adventure, well before formal science had confirmed how porpoises and dolphins use sound.
That combination of adventure and insight, that just set the stage perfectly for the film that made him a global household name.
The film adaptation of The Silent World, which he co-directed with the renowned Louis Malle, was released in 1956. It was visually groundbreaking. It was one of the first major documentaries to use color underwater cinematography to showcase the vibrancy of the ocean depths.
And the critical success was immediate. I mean, it was astounding for documentary.
It was sensational. It won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, an honor usually reserved for narrative fictional cinema, and then it went on to secure the 1957 Academy Award for Best Documentary.
That's huge.
That level of artistic and public acclaim immediately launched oceanography onto the global cultural stage. Suddenly, the ocean wasn't this monochrome empty void anymore. It was vibrant, it was colorful, and it was teeming with life.
And that cinematic success led directly to the medium that truly cemented his iconic status of a television.
The Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau. It ran from 1966 to 1976, and it was a phenomenon. It wasn't just another documentary series. It invented the personalized adventure style, where the host, the commander, guides you, the viewer, intimately through the unknown.
And that, of course, is what gave us the instantly recognizable figure, the commander in the signature red bonnet.
That visual identity was just brilliant marketing. The red bonnet was initially adopted for a practical reason. It made the divers easily visible to each other underwater, but it became this crucial piece of branding. It transformed Cousteau into the global figure, a sophisticated showman and teacher.
Even though he preferred to call himself an oceanographic technician.
Right, which was modest. But he understood that to save the ocean, he first had to make people care. And that required a bit of spectacle.
His prolific output just continued for decades, exploring everything from vast oceans to specific wrecks.
The sheer volume of his work is staggering. Beyond the main series, he produced the Cousteau Odyssey from 77 to 82, and then Cousteau's Rediscovery of the World from 86 to 92. These later series often focused on freshwater systems, like his Emmy-winning Cousteau, Mississippi in 1985. He was showing his commitment to the entire water cycle, not just the deep sea.
Looking at his specific discoveries, what are some of the historical wrecks he's credited with locating that really stand out in the sources?
Two major wreck finds are highlighted, and they're both historically significant. In 1976, his team successfully located the wreck of the HMHS Britannic.
The Britannic, okay.
This was a crucial discovery, because the Britannic was the younger sister ship to the RMS Olympic and, of course, the infamous Titanic. She sank during World War I in 1916 after striking a mine in the Key Channel. Later, Cousteau also located the wreck of a French 17th century ship of the line called La Therese in the coastal waters off Crete. These finds added substantial historical weight to his exploratory resume.
And he also tackled one of the most enduring public fears in marine biology, the shark.
He did. And he treated sharks not as monsters, but as subjects of serious study. In his 1970 book, The Shark, Splendid Savage of the Sea, which he co-wrote with his son Philippe, he provided deep insight into their behavior. And notably, he described the oceanic white-tip shark as the most dangerous of all sharks.
That's a strong statement. Why the white tip when the public usually fears the great white or the tiger shark?
Cousteau's reasoning was based on observation, particularly from wartime incidents. The oceanic white-tip lives in the open ocean, far from shore. They are often the first large predators to appear after a ship sinks in deep water, making them the primary risk to shipwreck survivors or downed airmen.
Ah, okay.
So Cousteau's designation was based less on aggressive encounters in shallow water and more on their opportunistic, persistent nature in areas where humans were most vulnerable.
The power of his communication, just marrying technical diving, historical discovery, and stunning visual narrative, it made him the global ambassador for the sea. But that public influential role, it came with immense personal costs and an increasingly sharp edge of controversy.
That's the necessary shift in our deep dives, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
His focus moves from pure discovery to ardent activism, and he navigates profound personal tragedy along the way.
This brings us to Section 4, Activism, Personal Tragedy, and Controversy. Let's start with his activism, which often manifested as, well, political direct action.
His environmental advocacy was not theoretical at all. He was hands-on, and it was immediate. The most vivid example of this happened in October of 1960, and it involved a direct confrontation over radioactive waste.
Radioactive waste?
Yes. The CEA, which is the French Atomic Energy Commission, planned to dump a massive amount of radioactive waste into the deep Mediterranean Sea, arguing that it was harmless.
Cousteau, who by then was a globally recognized figure, must have leveraged his celebrity in that moment.
Oh, he launched a highly visible and incredibly effective publicity campaign. The CEA tried to silence the opposition by claiming that French oceanographers supported the dump, but Cousteau publicly refuted this. He stated clearly that the potential risk, even if deepwater circulation was low, was simply too great for the fragile Mediterranean ecosystem.
And he mobilized public opinion with astonishing speed.
He did, and the campaign climaxed with the dramatic physical confrontation.
What happened?
In less than 2 weeks, Cousteau mobilized mass popular support scientists, local citizens, families. The train carrying the radioactive waste from Paris to the dump site was physically halted when women and children sat on the railway tracks.
Wow.
It was this powerful, non-violent moment of direct action. And Francis Perrin, the chief of the CEA, ultimately yielded to the immense public pressure and postponed the dump. It was a huge early victory for environmental activism and a clear demonstration of Cousteau's political and moral weight.
And following that successful advocacy, he formalized his environmental goals, right? He created an organizational structure to carry on his work.
Yes, in 1973, he co-founded the Cousteau Society for the Protection of Ocean Life alongside his sons and his colleague, Frederick Hyman. This society provided the institutional and legal framework for his lifelong advocacy.
And this work, it garnered international recognition.
It did. He received the prestigious UN International Palme Environment Prize in 1977. And later, in 1992, he formalized his advisory role on the global stage, becoming a consultant for both the United Nations and the World Bank.
So professionally, he reached the absolute pinnacle of influence as a global environmental champion. But this intense period was bracketed by some devastating personal losses.
The cost of a life on the edge, constantly traveling and pushing boundaries, was very high. The first tragedy was in December of 1972 when Michel Laval, who was the Calypso's second-in-command, was killed by a helicopter rotor during filming operations in Antarctica. But the loss that truly shook Cousteau was that of his son, Philippe.
Philippe was his intended successor, wasn't he? He was the heir apparent.
He was the designated successor, yeah. He was the son who had been co-producing his film since 1969 and really shared his father's deep affinity for exploration. In 1979, Philippe died tragically in a PBY Catalina flying boat crash during a takeoff on the Tagus River near Lisbon.
That's awful.
Cousteau was profoundly affected by this loss. It was a blow that, according to his biographers, he never fully recovered from, both personally and professionally. After Philippe's death, Cousteau did turn to his eldest son, Jean-Michel, and they collaborated for the next 14 years.
His personal life took another dramatic and very public turn in the early 1990s. And this complicated his family relationships even further and added another layer to this complex portrait of the commander.
It did. His first wife, Simone Melchior, who was such a critical and often unsung partner in the early rugged Calypso adventures. I mean, she was often the only woman aboard in those early years. She passed away from cancer in December of 1990.
And then just 6 months later, in June 1991, Cousteau married Francine Triplet.
Yes, and our sources highlight that this marriage was complex because he already had children with Francine before his first wife's passing.
That's correct. He had 2 children with Francine Diane, born in 1980, and Pierre-Yves, born in 1982, all while he was still married to Simone. This new marriage immediately worsened relations with his eldest son, Jean-Michel, especially since Jean-Michel was actually 8 years older than his new stepmother, Francine.
That's a difficult dynamic.
And this internal family conflict later erupted into a very public legal battle over the use of the famous Cousteau name.
It became a major conflict over legacy and commerce. In 1995, Jacques Cousteau initiated legal action to prevent Jean-Michel from using the Cousteau name for commercial purposes in the United States, specifically for advertising a business venture called the Cousteau Fiji Islands Resort.
And the court?
The court ultimately sided with Jacques. It ordered Jean-Michel not to encourage confusion between his for-profit business and his father's established nonprofit environmental endeavors, like the Cousteau Society. It was a really painful clash between 2 competing versions of what the Cousteau legacy should be.
This family strife and the pressure on his public image, it all coincided with his most controversial public statements, specifically regarding population control. We have to address this sensitive issue impartially, making sure we provide the necessary context.
This is a critical point. In a 1991 interview with the UNESCO Courier, Cousteau stated explicitly that he was in favor of human population control and population decrease.
And he followed that with a deeply provocative quote that is still cited today.
He did. He was quoted as stating, "World population must be stabilized, and to do that, we must eliminate 350,000 people per day."
And then he
immediately adds, "This is so horrible to contemplate that we shouldn't even say it. But the general situation in which we are involved is lamentable."
That is just a stark, almost unimaginable statement to hear from a public figure. What context can we possibly provide for the listener to understand how a dedicated conservationist reached such an extreme conclusion?
Well, to understand the mindset in 1991, you have to realize the depth of ecological anxiety that was prevalent among conservationists at that time. Concerns were rooted in Malthusian fears and reports from groups like the Club of Rome, which were projecting catastrophic resource depletion and irreversible environmental collapse due to population growth.
So he was seeing this firsthand.
He was witnessing large-scale destruction globally, from the Amazon to the Mediterranean, and he may have genuinely come to believe that the sheer weight of humanity was the primary environmental threat, and that led him to advocate for radical, albeit horrifying, solutions to save the planet he loved.
It just illustrates the profound paradox of his later years. The same man who so passionately fought to protect the ocean also wrestled with these deeply unsettling views on what he saw as the only effective way to preserve that environment by reducing the number of people interacting with it.
And the paradox deepens when you examine the killer algae issue. His legacy includes an accidental environmental degradation that is linked directly to the very institution he directed.
Tell us more about the infamous Caulerpa taxifolia.
This is the definitive environmental irony of his life. Cousteau was the longtime director of the Oceanographic Museum of Monaco, and it's widely accepted that the invasive algae, Caulerpa taxifolia, known colloquially as killer algae, was introduced into the Mediterranean ecosystem from the museum's facilities.
How did that happen?
The most likely scenario is that a tropical strain of the algae, which is being used for display in the museum's aquariums, was inadvertently released into the sea, perhaps through a tank overflow or just improper cleaning procedures.
And what was the environmental consequence of this algae escaping into the wild?
The consequence was catastrophic for parts of the Mediterranean. Caulerpa taxifolia is extremely aggressive, it's highly resistant to cold, and it produces toxins that discourage native herbivores from eating it. It just rapidly carpeted vast areas of the seafloor, suffocating native seagrass meadows and drastically reducing biodiversity in those regions.
That is a devastating irony. The world's greatest advocate for ocean protection may have inadvertently contributed to one of its most serious, man-made ecological problems.
It forces us to confront the fact that even the most dedicated conservationist, operating with the best intentions and the highest scientific apparatus, is still susceptible to the unforeseen negative consequences of human interaction with the natural world. Technology and research, even when driven by curiosity, carry inherent risk.
So we have global accolades sitting right next to intense family conflict, controversial philosophy, and accidental ecological damage. A truly complex, monumental, and sometimes contradictory legacy.
That's the man.
Despite the complexities and controversies of his later years, Cousteau's status as a cultural icon and pioneer remained undisputed right up until his death in 1997. Let's finish our deep dive by looking at Section 5, Final Years, Enduring Impact, and Successors.
His legacy was cemented in the highest echelons of both scientific and cultural recognition. He received significant honors throughout his life that highlight his multifaceted achievements. In 1972, he was designated a Commander of the Legion of Honor.
A huge deal in France.
A very big deal.
Yeah.
And then, crucially, in 1988, he was elected to the prestigious Académie Française, which is the highest literary and scholarly honor in France, confirming his status not just as an engineer, but as a major cultural intellectual.
And globally, he was recognized by the United States as well.
Yes. In 1985, he was awarded the U.S. Presidential Medal of Freedom, placing him among the giants of exploration and global statesmanship. He also received the BAFTA Fellowship in 1975 for his contributions to television and film. His influence truly crossed every border and every medium.
One of the most lasting markers of his cultural penetration, though, it wasn't a scientific award, it was a major pop music hit.
The John Denver connection is a fantastic example of his reach. John Denver's massive 1975 hit song Calypso was a direct, heartfelt tribute to Cousteau and his famous vessel. The song was a staple of that era, and it cemented the Calypso in the public consciousness, not just as a research boat, but as a global symbol of adventure and environmental responsibility.
His adventurous scientist image was so potent that it created a template for fictional portrayals that continue to this day.
He became the archetype. The most famous fictional character inspired by him is undoubtedly Steve Zissou in Wes Anderson's 2004 film The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. The aesthetic, the red attire, the submarine, the research vessel, it's all a playful, loving nod to the commander.
And there was a more serious biopic, too.
Yes, his life, particularly the fraught relationship with his wife Simone and the tragedy of son Philippe, was the focus of the expansive 2016 Friend biopic, The Odyssey.
Cousteau died in June of 1997, but a few years before his passing, his beloved Calypso, the platform for all his fame, suffered a very rough fate.
It did. In January 1996, the Calypso was accidentally rammed and sunk by a barge in the port of Singapore. It was a really symbolic blow to the organization and to Cousteau himself. And although she was eventually refloated and towed back to France, the vessel was severely damaged and entered this long, complex period of decay and legal battles over her restoration.
You highlighted earlier that Cousteau liked to be known as an oceanographic technician. Was that ever a truly accurate description of his role?
The sources really confirm this duality. While he possessed immense technical skill, he was, in reality, a sophisticated showman, teacher, and lover of nature. His greatest technological innovation, the Aqua-Lung, was quickly overshadowed by his mastery of communication. He pioneered what academics now call divulgationism, the simple, accessible sharing of complex scientific concepts. That style became fundamental to modern science broadcasting on television. He didn't just collect data, he made the data emotionally compelling and urgent for a global audience.
And the work he pioneered continues through the organizations he established.
Both the Cousteau Society and L'Équipe Cousteau are still active. A primary mission for them is centered on the difficult and expensive restoration of the original Calypso, hoping to finally turn her into a dedicated museum ship. They're also planning for the future, including a successor vessel, which is provisionally titled Calypso II.
But the spirit of that engineering and deep-sea exploration is perhaps most dynamically carried forward by his own family, in a direct continuation of the conch-shell vision.
That would be his grandson, Fabien Cousteau. He is advancing the work on fixed underwater habitats, bringing that conch-shell concept squarely into the 21st century. Fabien is currently constructing Proteus, which is planned to be this sophisticated modular underwater habitat designed for long-term ocean floor analysis off the coast of Curacao.
And this Proteus habitat, it's intended to surpass the capabilities of the original conch-shell projects, right? Using modern materials and technology.
Oh, absolutely. The plan is for aquanauts to reside and work in this structure, carrying out scientific research and observing marine ecosystems continuously. Front-end engineering for Proteus began in 2022 with the ambitious goal of having the habitat operational on the seafloor around 2025. It is a direct and functional continuation of Jacques Cousteau's vision of a sustained human presence beneath the waves.
It is so clear that Jacques-Yves Cousteau's impact is indelible. He was an inventor, an explorer, a filmmaker, a philosopher, and a political force. He was the essential bridge between the mysterious, unknown ocean and the human imagination. He convinced generations that this blue domain was critical to our survival.
His monumental legacy is quantifiable. You're talking over 120 television documentaries, more than 50 books, the Aqua-Lung Innovation, and an environmental protection foundation with hundreds of thousands of members worldwide. He created a global environmental consciousness almost single-handedly.
So what does this entire deep dive into his life, his engineering triumphs, his personal tragedies, and his complex controversies, what does it all mean for you, the learner, today?
Well, if we connect this extensive body of work to the bigger picture, Cousteau's life presents a profound and ongoing paradox for all of us who are engaged in innovation and exploration. He gave humanity the tools to see and fall in love with the ocean, becoming arguably the world's most famous environmentalist. But his legacy also includes dealing with the unforeseen negative consequences of that very human interaction with the sea, epitomized by the accidental introduction of the killer algae.
And that raises an essential question that his life encapsulates for all future generations of explorers and innovators, regardless of the frontier they seek to conquer.
It does. When humanity gains the ability to fully explore a new frontier, whether that's the deep ocean, the high Arctic, or the distant reaches of space, how can we ensure that the initial act of discovery, driven by curiosity and engineering brilliance, does not immediately and inadvertently become the first act of degradation? This is the central tension Cousteau's life embodies, the balance between the impulse to explore and the ethical imperative to preserve. Is a challenge that requires continuous critical thinking from anyone who seeks to be well-informed about the future of our world.